Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. My name is John, and I'm here to review a brand new 2026 movie, and that movie is Kill Trip.
You could be a killer.
I've heard that before.
Started about 5 years ago. Folks went missing, bodies showed up. Travelers, locals, men, women. No one's ever been caught.
How would it work?
Easy. You lure a bunch of festival goers into your van and drive us into the middle of nowhere.
It feels like we took a wrong turn and we weren't supposed to be here.
This movie was released to streaming in July of 2026. It is written and directed by Christian McKay. It stars Samari Armstrong, Corin Nemec, Stelio Savante, Chase Nelton Breithoff, Todd Jenkins, Brian Latimer, Brittany McIver, Faith McKenzie, Violet Ortega, Maya Hendricks, Amanda Huerto, and Tim Cage. Basic premise. On the way to a Texas music festival, a group of friends catches a ride with a magnetic van driver. But when people start vanishing, the real headliner becomes survival. So in my trying to figure out whether or not The Bay was coming to the movie theaters around me or streaming, I ended up stumbling on a new streamer release called Kill Trip. And I realized that by its title and by its basic premise, that it seemed like it was going to be a basic slasher coming to pay-per-view. So I did have a little bit of anticipation since the slasher subgenre of horror is one of my favorites. However, Kill Trip might subvert expectations and be something a little bit different. But we're going to get into the good, the bad, and the ugly on Kill Trip. So this movie is definitely a movie blend, and I guess I'll put the blend in the positives. And when I think of Kill Trips, I think of traditional slashers, i.e. Halloween or Friday the 13th, meets The Fog. There seems to be like a blend of other scary movies like The Strangers and Psycho and Wrong Turn. So, and we're going to get into how all these really big scary movies blend into this kind of tiny, low-budget amateurs streamer. You know, I had said this about Minnie's Midnight Massacre, about horror fans or people who watch too many horror movies, just watching a bunch of horror movies and then picking up a camera and thinking they can recreate the same magic. And I feel like this one was so low budget, but also just amateur, that they had seen a slasher or seen a lot of slashers, i.e. most of the titles I just mentioned, and thought that maybe they could do an inventive, creative, somewhat modern take on the slasher.
Sid, don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
But I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off right now and just say this one was really rough, and it seemed like it struggled the most with basic movie making principles, writing, dialogue, camera work, storytelling.
Started about 5 years ago. Folks went missing, bodies showed up. Travelers, locals, men, women. No one's ever been caught.
We're just going to say that this is going to be a straight up spoiler review. This is one of those reviews where I can honestly say, please just skip the movie and I can catch you up on what happens in here. But you've been warned, we're going to do straight up spoilers. So this movie starts off with a bunch of what seems like teenagers or college students, and I mean old enough to drive and old enough to be traveling on their own. I assume probably college students. And they're on this road trip and they are going to some sort of music festival, right? And the movie opens up with them, you know, dancing and having teenage, college age drama, young people drama. And I can tell you right out the gate that the way the scenes are edited together, it's kind of choppy in the way they're introducing the characters and in the way they're, the dialogue that they're having is already goofy right out the gate. And it seemed like there were parts of things that people I'd seen in other movies, and it just kind of filters its way in, and then it just doesn't land right. Let me start off by saying that, like, there's so many characters in here. So you have a group of kids that are going in a van, and their car breaks down, and they get picked up by this other young guy that seems to be pretty much in their age bracket, and he's going to give them a ride to a hotel, and then the following day give them the rest of the ride to where they're going in Texas to this like festival or concert, right? But right out the gate, the person who I initially thought was going to be our final girl, and this is a movie where I struggle to figure out who the real final girl is, but she's in the front seat with this new guy who seems pretty normal mostly, but some of the things he says puts him in the potential killer thing. Potential killer, you know, potential stalker, potential bad person with this kid. And this girl starts having conversations about, oh, well, you might, you know, take us to a hotel and chop us up, and like we might be in, you know, a slasher. Like, literally, it's trying to be meta, right? So, but it wasn't pulling off meta the way Scream pulled off meta. It was just like blatantly just saying, oh, we're in a slasher.
We're gonna die.
Everyone in this car all these other kids are in this car, and they're hearing this conversation, and it's like, no one really mentions it right away, but it does get brought up later between two of these girls. So I'm going to be honest with you. There are so many young characters and so many other characters in this movie that I have trouble keeping track. And I'm going to have my cheating notes right here because you heard the list of names of people in this movie. It's hard to keep track of them because a lot of these younger ones, they all look the same. These middle-aged characters who some of them are the villains and some of them are like red herrings. And some of them, I don't even know what they are, but they're a little bit easier to differentiate. And there is, in this entire movie, one character that I really did like. And that is, who I really think is the final girl, and that is Midnight Misty. But what's crazy about Midnight Misty is why I referred in the beginning of this movie review of the blend of The Fog. And that is because in The Fog, you had one of the girls in there, played by Adrienne, who was always at the radio station, and she was doing like a late night radio show. And when the fog rolls in The Fog, there's a lot of scenes of this radio girl and her program, and it really added to what made The Fog an awesome movie, right? John Carpenter's The Fog from 1980.
It's exactly 12 minutes after midnight, and this is Stevie Wayne, your night light, around until about 1 o'clock. I'm high tonight in the KAB Lighthouse on Spivey Point, and in case you've forgotten, it's April 21st, and a happy birthday for Antonio Bay. Now there's a celebration planned for tonight, so if you're so excited about it you can't sleep, well, stay up with me, and I'll figure out some way to keep you occupied.
Well, they definitely were trying to make Midnight Misty this character, because it's every time we cut to Midnight Misty, she's basically just in her radio talking about music, talking about her listeners, taking requests and all that stuff. And she was the only real positive I've had for this movie. The problem with her is that she's not really connected to anyone else in this movie. There is a moment at the end where I thought they were going to pull it together and have an awesome scene, and Midnight Misty is like the star of the scene. And I'll get into that at the end of the review. But like, it was a missed opportunity, what they did in there. It was basically just a setup for a fake nothing. But Meanwhile, these kids all get brought to this hotel, and there's all this like teenage drama. And I'm not even gonna get into who's, dating who's hooking up with who, and there's tons of that going on because there's too much of it going on. It's impossible to almost keep track of all these characters because these young kids that are in the van, it seemed to be like 6 or 7 of them, and then they go to this bar and they meet up with more young kids who hook up. So it's definitely like they're in this town wherever this hotel is, which was giving the Psycho vibe, because now we're gonna have a serial killer in a hotel. And that's the only reason why I say Psycho, but they also, one of the kills takes place in a shower. So like they were trying to be Psycho in that scene. In fact, the way it was filmed and the way the girl like gets killed in the shower, falls to the ground and the blood going down the drain, and the way they zoom in on her face at the end, except for it's the most dollar store generic version of the Psycho shower scene I've ever seen in my whole life. It was terrible. It had no tension. It wasn't scary. And we don't even know who the killer is. In fact, for the majority of this movie, we don't know who the killer is because they never really say who the main killer is. We do find out as the movie unravels certain ones who are definitely killers or certain ones who are involved with the killers. And I'll say it right now, this young kid who's the van driver is involved with the killers. But he's trying to get away from them. And that's kind of where I was getting... These killers were giving me Strangers vibe, like Stranger vibes without the mask. I just want to say that, I honestly think this has to be one of the technically worst films I've ever watched that have been made. So, last year, at the number 2 slot for worst movies of the year was Filled with Screams, which was a movie about scarecrows that haunted this group of kids in a farmhouse. And it was terrible execution, and it was very similar here where the acting, the camera work, even the basic editing and the volume, there's this one scene where a girl opens a door and then shuts the door, and we don't even hear and she slams it. We don't even hear the door slam. And it was completely silent, not even music, and I'm like, why did that one little, and it was a little snippet, but why did that one snippet have 0 sound? And then this was another thing that I said about Filled with Screams, where I had to turn the music down, or turn the movie down a little bit when the music scenes were on, and they were playing music over what was going on. Like I said in Find Your Friends, thumper songs were playing, high intensity club beat songs. And I'm turning it down, but then as soon as those scenes are over, I'm turning it back up because I'm struggling to hear the dialogue when characters are just talking. There was a diner scene where I felt like I could barely hear people talking, and sometimes it seemed like the camera was far away and they didn't have good microphones or something. I don't know. I honestly can't even explain this one. Another thing, you know how in Halloween they had the POV shot from the killer, but we always knew it was Michael Myers because we either saw the little eyes and we would hear the breathing. So it just kind of was that reinforcement, we're watching the scene through Michael's eyes right now. Sometimes this movie would do that, but there was nothing that ever told you that you were watching from the killer's point of view, except for the one trick which was done in Halloween and multiple 80s slasher, where you see it's the view from behind an object where they're peering, and then you think that those characters are doing whatever off in the distance or about to see you, so it kind of backs behind. I did this in many of my movies that I filmed because it's an easy trick for amateurs to learn, and I self-taught myself how to do that. But here, it was done okay, but it was done too much, and it never added to the tension of the scene. It just seemed like whenever they wanted to say the killer was nearby, they resorted to that gag. And half the time it didn't result in a kill. It just resulted in it going to another thing. There were so many times in this movie where I'm finally getting wrapped into a certain group of characters. I'm trying to nail down who's who with everyone and saying, okay, these two are together, having a little dialogue, and then it cuts to another scene, then cuts to another scene, and cuts to another group. There's just too many of them. And then, so the older characters, you have, so this van driver has this person that's, middle age, my age, who basically he's clearly one of the killers, right? The way he's drinking a lot, he's rude as hell, he's stupid, but like he's dating this, like he gets involved with this girl, like this beautiful woman, and she's not even that beautiful, but she's all dolled up, like all like dressed up, kind of like half a hooker, you know, out clubbing. But she goes to visit this guy, and they're like they know each other from living in the same town. It's like they're gonna hook up, but then like he finds out that she's a police officer, and then he just kills her. And I'm like, okay, you just killed a police officer. And so this police officer, her only really role in this movie was to give a little exposition, and the exposition was I'm in town to check the Travelodge Killer. And what a terrible name for a psycho killer, or like, you know, an urban legend killer, the lodge killer, because they're basically killing in hotels, right? So they go to the lodge and kill people. Here's another thing where I thought it was the biggest weakness, because it seemed like every scene was just two people. There was never like a group scene. There was never like a panic scene. There was never like a scene in this movie where everyone comes together that's after one or two have died and they realize that they're in dire straits and need to escape. It just seems like everyone gets separated and random things happen to each other. So like at one point, two of them reconvene and they're trying to get away with this van driver. And she's like, where's everyone else? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe they hooked up. Maybe they're somewhere. Maybe they were already at the festival. Like, what? Like, maybe they're chopped up in the shower like the one was. And they just leave. And they're heading to their destination. So, like, literally, there's so much in this movie that is just ridiculous and makes no sense. You know, sometimes they would have conversation about something, and it seemed like before anything would really happen in some of these separated, isolated situations, some random character would say, oh, something mysterious and something could happen. Like they just sensed, even though nothing happened, to make them think something was about to go down. And then after they make the quirky comment, then something weird goes down. But you know, I feel like there's maybe a total of 4 kills in this movie total. When you have a cast of like almost 20 and you have 4 kills. So like the ratio of kills here, you had plenty of people to slash. And they just, so many of them, we don't even know what happens to them. In fact, at one point there was this dark-haired girl who had a sensible moment. She was like, oh, I feel like those two were talking in the van about being serial killers and we should be concerned. So I'm going to stay in my room all night. And eventually she gets chopped up. She's the one that dies in the shower scene, right? But then like there's scenes later where I felt like she was in them and I'm like, wait a second, didn't that girl die multiple scenes back? Or was it just another girl that was in this movie that I thought, well, it wasn't the final girl. It wasn't Never Midnight Misty. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the one talking about like getting all flirty with the van driver. So how many dark-haired girls were there in this movie? There was one blonde girl, so she was one of the young characters that I could always differentiate. And it's like, seriously. So I want to talk about one of the characters called the Glove Man. So at one point we see this Glove Man, and he's another one that's a middle-aged guy that he seems kind of homely. You know, he's got this really bizarre walk. He was another thing that reminded me of the Scarecrows from Field of Screams, because he walked like them, all slow, old, like needed a walker, drunk. You know, when Michael Myers used to walk slow in Halloween, it was scary. The way, even Halloween 2, all the front end Halloweens managed to do this really well. Like the first 6. Michael Myers would walk slow and always managed to catch up with you. It was always intimidating with the music, with everything. This guy's walking like an imbecile. The only thing that's creepy about him is he looks creepy, he looks demented, but he's not intimidating. Now, I think he really was meant to be a red herring, because I don't think he's one of the killers, even though he kind of does kill somebody. again, how this movie is just dumb and is bizarre. So like, how does he kill someone? So there's this one scene where the van driver, the young van driver who's driving these kids to the hotel, he's talking to the middle-aged drunk guy who'd killed the police officer, and they're battling. This young kid says, I'm out of this. I'm tired of being a slasher. I don't want to be involved anymore. Why did you kill so-and-so? Why did we kill this? I don't want to kill this girl. You know, this girl that's giving him serial killer talk. He doesn't want to kill her, even though she wants to kill him. You know, and then, so anyhow, Glove Man shows up to them having this little battle outside the van in some random field somewhere near the hotel, and kills the killer, kills one of the killers, and then just kind of pets the guy. He just pets him. It's like, oh, you're okay now. I saved you. Bye. And just walks away. Like, is this movie serious? So there's that. Then you have, all right, so then you have Hank, another middle-aged one. He's like the cop. So he turns out to be the father of the van driver, right? And Hank has this really odd scene where this is like where a character just shows up out of the blue. Like, so like halfway through the movie, Hank shows up in this diner and he's talking with this waitress. And then the older character, Levi was his name. So the other killer was Levi, the middle-aged drunk one that slaughtered the cop. He's Levi. So Levi and Hank are having this bizarre conversation in the diner. And then Hank leaves. So like, Hank is barely in this movie, right? He was in this diner scene. He shows up in one of the hotel's room and catches one of the young kids in there with one of the other girls. And just says something like, oh, what are y'all doing in here? But like, he's not in the movie, right? But he plays a pivotal part of the way in, as if even though he was one of the local police, it seemed as though maybe he was in on this whole serial killer. So maybe this was like The Strangers, where you have a town of people who are fine with people killing in their town as long as it's not locals. And there was a comment, I feel like it was said, like, where he got mad where it was going to be a local. I'm like, all right, this is another movie that dancing around the Strangers trilogy is like, we're not going to go down that same road.
All right, Night Riders, it's Midnight Misty on 91.7, keeping it low and dirty.
So it might seem like I'm telling this story out of order. I'm really not. It is a little bit out of order, but like, it doesn't even matter because the order of the way this movie unravels, it just don't make sense. I'm trying to just talk about the most pivotal things that seem to be the stupidest, but I want to get into the scene with Midnight Misty that I thought started off awesome. Like, I thought, here we go, we've got something. It was executed great in the front end of the scene, and then it turns into stupidity. So Midnight Misty is doing one of her little speeches. Someone had just requested a song, and then another person calls in and says, I'm going to kill you. And it was a little generic, but as the conversation started to unravel, I felt like the actress who played Midnight Misty, and that was Samari Armstrong, and she's listed at the top of this group of people. Maybe it's alphabetical, I don't know. But she basically was the best actress in this, and then she does this scene quite well up until the gag ends. So like, the killer is threatening to kill her over the phone, and she's playing tough final girl, like, oh no, yeah, you know, go ahead, bring it. Like, you don't, basically like calling his bluff, like maybe she doesn't even know really where he is, or he's nowhere nearby, he's on the phone. She basically called him a telephone tough guy, and said, you know, she gets all tough, but then like the power cuts in the radio station. And I was like, oh, yes, the killer is there. This is about to be a decent kill, right? So the power shuts off. It's like 15 seconds, and I'm waiting for some killer to pop up. And it's some other random dude who accidentally tripped the power off when he came in. And Midnight Misty turns around. She's like, oh, Clark, like, what the hell? Whatever his name was. It was some dumb name. But she's like, what the hell? You scared me. It wasn't a killer. It wasn't anything. And then the phone call had disconnected because he tripped the power. The killer was never really there. And I thought, wouldn't that have been a great kill? But no, we never got that kill. We just got fake fake nothing. And then this movie comes to a climax with just such stupidity. So like the one girl that was like flirting with this van driver the whole time, she shows up and her and the van driver boy have this knife fight, which was almost like a dance but also a fight. It was so bizarre. It was choreographed weird. It was like, I think they were trying to say like, oh, how demented these guys are, and I just like, it's like two serial killers that one of them doesn't even really want to be a serial killer. He's trying to get out, though he's been a serial killer with Levi, and I guess Hank. I feel like Hank's involved, though we don't know why Hank's involved, except for Hank is his dad, right? That's what we find out. So basically, after this little knife scene, right, he brings her back to his house, and the guy Hank comes in, but you can't see him, and they have him in the darkness. He sits down at the table, he's talking with his son, and he's being introduced to the girl, and then all of a sudden it's like this giant reveal, like, oh, this kid's father is Hank, the policeman. And I thought, and then that was like, I thought, which was the end. And then we get one more Midnight Misty little radio thing, and you think it's the end because they play a song and everything, and then no, it goes to another scene of people who weren't in the whole movie and some other police officer. It was like, it should have been like an end credit scene or like a sequel based scene. I don't even know what it was, but like it was a police officer pulling over people on the way to the festival. And I'm like, it was some of the kids that were in and out throughout the movie, but they didn't really do anything pivotal, and they were in this like final scene. The fact that this like other girl who was kind of like felt like the final girl for the majority of the movie, even though she was flirting with the other killer the whole time, the van driver killer who didn't really he did kill, I felt like he killed one person. But I just said this in I Heart Willie, where the final girl was crushing on Willie and then turns into Minnie. And this was like, that was her same arc. So like this movie, I'm just going to get down to business on this because I feel like I don't want this review to be super long because this movie is rough. It's a spam. Please skip it. Don't even, I rented it I wasn't even buying this one because I knew it was going to be basic. And you know what? I can tell you this, like when slashers come straight to streamer, I'm happy with a predictable, basic Friday the 13th meets Halloween ripoff for an hour and a half of people in a van showing up on a wrong turn and getting slashed up. This got too complicated with too many random ass characters and random ass stupidity, poor execution all the way around from start to finish. I don't know how a movie of this quality gets put on a streamer, on a pay-per-view streamer. If anything, this will be on Tubi or straight to one. It should have went straight to Tubi or one of those other ones. Anyhow, that's it. Please like, subscribe, tap that notification bell, and don't forget to stay scared of a bunch of random road trip serial killers and some demented final girl serial killer as well.
Yeah, exactly. Classic.
Some people think they're the wolf, and they forget how many hunters are out there.
If you're driving right now, maybe towards something, maybe away, just know the dark doesn't care who you are. It's only curious about what you're doing next.